to our licensing session, Licensing a World of Opportunity. My name is Nikki Simpson. If you don't know me, as you see, I probably do know most of you. So hi everybody, great to see you. I'm the founder and director of the International Licensing Centre, which if you'd like to know more about, I've got a little exhibition stand downstairs. Thank you. We're an international organisation set up to strengthen the magazine publishing industry, and eventually will be a physical building dedicated to all things magazine based in Edinburgh. So look forward to that. I've got a meeting with council next week. Cross fingers for me. Today we're here to talk about licensing. The International Magazine Centre, because we are an international organisation, one of the things that was suggested to me quite early on was to set up a licensing hub so that we could share international titles, or titles that wanted to be international, with other markets, with other territories. So I wanted to talk to people at Magfest a little bit more about it, and tell you it's on offer, and introduce you to the wonderful world of licensing through our fantastic speakers. So first up we have Tim Hudson, who is in charge of licensing. I'm sorry, I haven't memorised your exact title. In charge of licensing at Immediate Media. Followed by Margaret Ann Dowling, who I met in Berlin at the end of last year, who is, she just has the most mind-blowing ideas, so be prepared to walk away from this going, what? Or, oh, that sounds, yes, I have it all organised in my head. Hopefully you'll be able to understand it better than I can. Anyway, I hope you'll welcome them, and Tim, you're up first.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, thanks, Nikki, and thank you for inviting me to talk today at Magfest. My job title is actually Director of International Licensing and Syndication at Immediate Media, which probably gives me the longest job title in the room, I'm sure. And before I kind of go on to talk about today's presentation, a little bit of background information about myself. I've had this role at Immediate Media for just over 5 years. Prior to that, I've held a number of senior commercial roles at other UK media businesses, including UTV Media, Redwood, Time Inc. as was, and most pertinent to today's presentation, I was also licensing director at Future Publishing for 6 years. So I've got about 11 years experience kind of in the international licensing arena, which depressingly, I guess, makes me a bit of a veteran in that field, although fortunately for today's session, means that hopefully I've got some useful information and knowledge to impart. Does anyone in this room actually have any international activity attached to their business? Brilliant, so I can kind of say anything and you'll have to believe me.
And you.
Well, apart from you, but I've known Margaret for years. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview about Immediate Media because I think it's important to understand Immediate as a business in terms of our market positioning and the fantastic brands we have, because they're an intrinsic part in what builds the success of our international business. And they're going to get a little bit more prescriptive and hopefully give you something of a toolkit when looking at licensing to understand kind of what it is from a magazine media perspective, why it works and why you should be doing it, what you need to succeed. And they're going to look at some key trends we're sort of seeing from a global perspective, and then look at some of the new opportunities which are availing themselves to us. Clearly, we all know it's a rapidly changing media marketplace, and some new and interesting opportunities are presenting themselves to us. So at Immediate, we're very kind of specific, really, about how we define ourselves and how we refer to ourselves as well. As you can see here, it's the special interest, content and platform company. Bit of a mouthful, but it's quite simple, really, what we mean. When we're talking about special interest, we're talking about the stuff that people do. Their hobbies, their passions, they're super engaged. They spend a lot of time and money on these subjects. When we're talking about content, we're talking about, the compelling and engaging content we create. When we're talking about platform, we're not talking about our good friends in social media platforms. We're talking about the platforms upon which we distribute our content and intellectual property, be it print, digital media, e-commerce, or increasingly events. We've recently acquired a couple of events businesses, kind of quite a hot subject area for Immediate at the moment. Now, I use the phrase special interest, but by special interest doesn't mean small. In fact, kind of quite the opposite. What we're interested in is special interest markets which we can leverage at scale. So whether that's 10 million TV addicts, 6 million cyclists, or 15 million foodies, what we're interested in is engaging large groups of people to have interesting, dynamic commercial conversations with. And that's kind of a key part when understanding our business, certainly from a UK perspective. What's powering these conversations is some of the brands. Now, this is just a snapshot of some of the 70 brands that we publish in the UK. And it looks kind of on the face of it, that's quite a disparate kind of group of brands there, but they have a number of things in common. I think number one, they tend to be number one or number two in the marketplace in which they operate. Number two, and perhaps more importantly really to our kind of strategic offering, they tend to be at the centre of the conversation that those communities are offering. So whether it's like what should we watch on Christmas Day on TV in the Radio Times, to what food and recipes should we prepare using BBC Good Food, how to help plan for the biggest day of your life, arguably your wedding, using our digital wedding planning brand Hitched, or getting information on the Tour de France guide, where you're going to ride at the weekend using Bike Radar, which is the world's biggest cycling website. So a lot of very powerful brands there which power the conversations in the communities that we serve. And getting back to the idea of scale, you know, if you kind of dedupe all that and aggregate it all together, you can see it's a pretty scaled audience from a UK perspective. 1.1 million monthly magazine subscribers. We sell about 75 million magazines on an annual basis. If you dedupe our digital audience, it's about 33 million uniques. And we amplify that through social media reach across the various channels to 18 million. So it's very much a scaled audience in the UK. But that's enough about the UK, but it's important to talk about it to understand kind of the DNA of our international business as well. So onto the part of the business that I run, international licensing. There's the empire in all its glory, 90 plus print and digital licenses and 50 syndication deals. Syndication is a really important part of our business actually. I'll come on to talk about that in a minute. We've got 48 partners and we work in 36, actually it's probably 37, 38 now, countries. So this gives us quite a good global perspective across multiple markets in multiple sectors as well. And to put that in context, we're probably kind of top 3 magazine media licenses in Europe and probably top 5 kind of globally as well. So we're working with most of the major players, both traditional and non-traditional. Just giving you a little bit of kind of a breakdown in terms of the nuts and bolts of our business, looking at the regional breakdown of where our revenue comes from. Probably about 45% is still coming from Western Europe, and probably about 25% is coming from Asia Pacific. So about 70% of our business is coming from Western Europe and Asia Pacific. And that has actually stayed pretty similar over the last 4 or 5 years. What's changed within it sometimes is which specific territories are generating more revenue than others, like whether it's France or Germany, whether it's China or Japan, but those kind of metrics have stayed quite similar. The one where there's probably been a little bit more volatility would be around Eastern Europe. Obviously, across Eastern Europe at any single point, there can be, you know, various social, political, economic issues which can impact on the media scene, which have a direct impact upon our licensing business there as well. So probably about 70% of our business is across those 2 key markets, and that's a percentage that we're kind of quite happy with. Drilling down a little bit more by that, looking at our kind of revenue by platform, probably about 55-60% of our business is still in print licensing. That's going down, but it's still a significant chunk of what we do. Probably about 15% is print syndication, then about 25% of the business is digital, whether that's digital licensing, say web licensing for Top Gear, or digital syndication, where our content is going across multiple different platforms in multiple different markets. So probably about 25% of our business is digital. And that's changing. You know, like everybody else, we're transitioning to digital. Like everybody else, a lot of our print business has some pressure. Although I think being in the special interest sector shields us from some of that pressure. And it's probably changed about 5 percentage points either way year on year. So 5% bigger this year than last year. And we're probably 5 to 7% growth in digital for next year. So just to get a little bit more granular, so you can kind of see the sort of brands which tend to resonate from an international perspective, before I get a little bit more prescriptive talking about licensing per se. A brand I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with, Top Gear. It's kind of our calling card. Top Gear, you know, it's still a phenomenon. Despite the well-documented punching brand issues from Jeremy Clarkson a few years ago, he did his best to destroy the brand. It's still going pretty strong. We've got 35 licenses, 24 print, 11 web. We're seeing more growth from a web perspective as well on Top Gear, and signing some web-only deals now in certain territories. But we just launched in Thailand digital-only last week. And I think we're going to see several more deals such as that going forward as well. We haven't quite got the A to Z. I'm a bit annoyed about this. We need Azerbaijan and we need Zambia. So if anyone's got any contacts there, you know, speak to me after. But as you can sort of see there, it is pretty much everywhere, Top Gear. One area it isn't is South America, which seems strangely resistant to the charms of Top Gear, but that's certainly a work in progress for us. Another brand that everyone again in this room is probably pretty familiar with is BBC Good Food. Huge brand in the UK. It's the biggest food media brand in the UK by a considerable margin. With, you know, at Christmas time it's getting 23 million uniques. You know, it's something of a phenomenon. It's pretty big for us internationally as well. 5 print licenses, 3 in those culinary hotspots of Bulgaria, Hungary and Poland. Which seems a little bit counterintuitive, and 2 more actually in known culinary hotspots of India and UAE and Dubai. What's been quite interesting from our perspective actually, we've really mined the archive. You know, we've got 25,000 recipe database, which is growing on a monthly basis. You know, food content, I mean, Mark will know this from the days at Markup, really high quality food content is expensive to produce, expensive to shoot. Photographers cost a lot of money, food stylists cost a lot of money. You know, we've got 25,000 recipes and going strong on that. So we're now syndicating this into multiple markets here from both a print and a digital perspective. And one other interesting thing actually as well, we license an event. Now licensing events is quite an interesting kind of departure for us. We haven't done it before. We started doing it with our partner in Dubai, and I've got a short video which might work. Yeah. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of what the event's like. It is very Dubai, I have to sort of say. I try not to show that to my boss, my wife, because they think my life's a lot more glamorous than it actually is when I kind of go on overseas trips. But it's a brilliant way of obviously of kind of getting a physical manifestation of your brand, generating great PR for the brand, and getting consumers to kind of interact with the brand as well. Other popular brands we operate in. This is our kind of educational sort of sector, for want of a better expression, which is pretty big for us. Specifically really, mainly across Central and Eastern Europe and Asia. Those markets tend to put quite a premium on educational learning and also educational brands. And this has been quite a growth area for us over the last 3 or 4 years. Then an area I know absolutely nothing about, craft, but it's huge for us. You know, I mean, this is just a snapshot of some of the licenses. We've got multiple other licenses as well. You know, I mean, it's absolutely kind of colossal for us. You know, and also mindfulness is an area which is growing for us as well within the moment, and Project Carbon. It's a great example of a classic example of a special interest kind of subject matter where people are incredibly passionate, engaged with that subject matter across multiple different formats for us. I just wish I knew a bit more about it. And the last bit I'm going to talk about in terms of immediate business is it's kind of unsexy bookazines, but we're smashing it from an international perspective. On bookazines. We kind of wash our face in the UK, to be honest, at Immediate on the bookazines. We put quite a lot out, but they kind of just about break even, depending on the subject matter. But from an international perspective, you know, we've seen some huge growth, 500% over the last 4 years. And it tends to be really across history, science, and craft. And I know it's not just us, I know Future and Dennis are also doing very well in the bookazine area. So, you know, it's been something of a sort of a sleeper hit for us. I'm really pleased about that. And actually, I mean, I don't know if you can sort of make out here, it's quite dark, but Stephen Hawkins, when he, you know, unfortunately passed away kind of last year or the year before, that was our biggest ever international. We made £75,000 in international sales on that. So death sells, you know, even internationally. Not saying that we have a wish list of people who want to die, but, you know, who knows? Controversial. So, I want to get a bit more prescriptive now and hopefully give you something of a toolkit. And forgive me if this is kind of sort of teaching grandma to suck eggs. But I thought it's worth getting quite kind of granular for those of you not so familiar with it. At its basic level, it's allowing third-party companies to produce a local version of the brand, whether that's print, digital, event in their local market. The simplest way to illustrate this is probably imagine you're on holiday in a supermarket, you're in Spain, you see a Spanish version of Top Gear, or you're looking at cars online, you see a Spanish website for Top Gear. That's been produced by a local publisher. In Spain, for instance, it's Axel Springer, the well-known German publisher. and they're producing it under license with immediate media. 3 main components of the deal: trademark, brand, content. That's pretty consistent wherever you go. And it's a legally binding contract over an agreed term, generally 5 years, sometimes it's 3, depends on the partner. Some people ask for 10 or 15-year deals, which who knows what's going to be around in 10 or 15 years. And then it tends to be multi-platform, print, digital, podcast, and increasingly events as well. But it's not every deal is multi-platform. It depends on the brand, and it depends on the market and the partner you're operating with. And that's quite an understood and well-received kind of way of working wherever you happen to be from a global perspective. Syndication, slightly sinister image there, but anyway, syndication, a little bit more easy to understand. That's when basically people are just taking your images or your video, your text, and putting it into their brand. So you're not licensing it, you're just giving them their content to put into their brands. And that's actually been a really growing part of our business over the last couple of years. And actually syndication, we're currently at record levels, so it's a big growth market and big growth opportunity for us. So why does it work? Why do we do it? Why have I got a department of kind of 15 people going around the world doing this sort of stuff? But if you kind of think about it, we're all producing and publishing fantastic content, whether it's on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, or even quarterly kind of basis. Once you put it out to your local market, it's just sat there. It's not doing anything. This is really about sweating the assets, to use a very horrible phrase. So by doing that, you're able just to monetize your existing content and brands. You've created it once, get it out into other markets. It's also high margin. I mean, we operate on a margin of about 65 to 75%. We would be higher, but because we work a lot with the BBC, we have to employ people from a compliance perspective, otherwise our margin would be higher than that. So, it can be a very lucrative business if you get it right. And this is a really important part about extending global reach and creating networks. This is really important for big brands such as Top Gear, because we've got 20 plus licensed editions. The global heads of marketing at all the big manufacturers know that a single call to the UK Top Gear editor can ensure 25 covers, 20 website takeovers. They can release kind of exclusives on a global basis. It's really important in terms of developing the network and developing close relationships with key commercial partners as well. And the other thing as well, there are different routes to international expansion. Licensing is just one of them. It's probably the lowest risk versus other forms. You need to think strategically if you're looking to invest. If you're looking at a JV, there's lots of potential issues with JV, things that can go wrong. If you're looking at outright acquisition, you can destroy shareholder value. There's a whole host of things that can kind of go wrong. The payoff time is generally in the years. From a licensing perspective, it's a pretty low risk. People are taking your intellectual property, but using their capital to develop it. So it's quite a light touch way of expanding. And of course, just sort of say here, and this is one of the key things, it's minimizing risk because you're using people that understand the market in which they operate, they understand distribution, they understand the digital ecosystem, they have the journalistic contacts, so on and so forth. So you're working with people that know the market they're in. So why does it work from a licensee perspective? If you're sat there wanting to license a brand, what's in it for you? Well, point number one is tried and tested successful brands. Going back to using Top Gear as an example, Top Gear is in 20 odd markets. If it works in one market, it's probably going to work in the adjacent market as well. It's not a guarantee, but it is likely to. Consequently, it's lower risk, and it also gives you lower cost than developing your own brands. The costs in developing, particularly at bigger publishers, the costs behind developing your own brands are pretty significant. And obviously, if you can take an accepted, well-known brand, which is a track record of success, it really minimises that risk. Potential for global ad deals, I'd put that in brackets, to be honest. It's not a panacea. They're a lot more difficult to execute than you'd think, and there's a lot of territorial kind of issues about that, like who controls the budget, where does it come from. You need to make sure you're not treading on the toes of local ad deals as well. But if you get it right, it can be quite good. And also increasingly, particularly in a kind of fast-moving media kind of landscape, it's an opportunity to learn from like-minded partners. We learn from quite a few of our partners, particularly some of the small, more digitally minded partners we work with in certain markets. So it's an opportunity to share knowledge and learning. So what you need to succeed, this is kind of the money shot, I guess. And it's really all about the holy trinity, as I call them, of brand, content, and concept. And if you're thinking about expanding internationally, they're the kind of as a kind of strategic roadmap, like does your business have legs to do it? These are 3 questions worth asking. Firstly, does my brand have resonance outside of a local market? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's a question you need to ask yourself. Is the content I produce compelling and difficult to create elsewhere? Is the concept transferable to overseas markets? You need at least 2, preferably 3 of these things to understand that your brand probably does have legs from an international perspective. The concept thing is an interesting thing. You see, we're really big on craft. We have no craft in Asia because Asian crafting habits are completely different. Nobody's going to knit in Thailand. It's 35 degrees all the time. So our concept of simply knitting isn't going to work in China. It isn't going to work in Thailand, but it will work in Northern and Western Europe. So you need to align all these things. And then you need a lot of internal processes, which I'm going to come on and talk about. I'm not saying it's complicated, but there's a number of different moving parts. Some of which, basically, the first thing you need to understand really is your intellectual property and your rights management. I'm regularly surprised, even in a business as large as Immediate Media, we've got 1,400 employees, 75 brands, a really well-established licensing business. I'm still quite surprised the lack of understanding about the content that's being created, the rights that are being agreed, and therefore what you can do with those rights as well. So you really need to be on top of that. And also rights management, you need to understand, do you own that content? What deals have you agreed with your contributors? Can you exploit that content to third parties? You then obviously need either a licensing department, but if you can't afford a licensing department, there's quite a few people out there that do licensing on a kind of a sort of sales house basis, and some pretty good people as well. You also need a really good content delivery solution. You can have the best content in the world, but you need to get it to people in a timely and effective way. We have an online content delivery platform which sits on the back of our digital asset management system at Immediate, but it also needs to be rights managed. So you need to invest quite a bit of time and money. And also, it's a very collaborative process. I spend a lot of my time dealing with legal, dealing with finance, and then dealing with the respective brand teams from a commercial and creative viewpoint, because you really need to work closely with these people to make sure you have a successful licensing platform. So onto the process, a bit granular, but kind of important really. This is by far the most important part on here, the most perfunctory, but get the relevant partner. If you don't get the right partner, the whole thing's probably screwed, to be honest. Because even in 24/7 digital age, we're all in touch with each other all the time, and everything's very, very transparent. You're entrusting your brand and content to people that are literally thousands of miles away, and you need to ensure that they share the same vision, value, and goals that you do. So trust and transparency needs to be at the heart of that relationship. I mean, there's numerous horror stories of things that I could tell you have kind of gone wrong, but I won't. So that's why you really need to get that right. We work on a very kind of standardised business planning and budgeting process with our partners. So we're all establishing very early on what we think the financial parameters of the relationships are going to be. You agree on that budget, you negotiate commercial terms. The standard model, which is still fairly prevalent, is a minimum guarantee based on the percentage of net revenues. Generally, it's between 8 and 10%. Sometimes people want it less, but you try and keep it around about the 8 to 10% mark. Agree a launch date. This is really important, induction and training. Don't just chuck your brand and content and let them get on with it. You do need to spend some time working with your partner, making sure they're imbued with your brand's DNA, that they understand it, any of the technical issues around the digital aspects of the deal as well. So it's really important you spend time inducting and training them. And this is really critical. You need to get off to a good start. So we spend a lot of time and effort, particularly if it's print, the first 3 issues, if it's digital, the first 3 months or so, working on approval processes with them, making sure they're really kind of getting on top of the brand and they understand it. It's an iterative process, and it's kind of ongoing. So once they got out of the way, it's not you fly away and kind of succeed. You need to kind of keep in touch with them, whether that's something as basic as newsletters, conferences. My licensing managers kind of travel around the world seeing our partners. We also hold conferences for our bigger brands as well. It's a constant process of making sure people are kind of on point, on brand, and also because your brand changes as well in the UK. You need to make sure as the kind of mothership brand changes, you're bringing your licensing partners on board with you. So in terms of some kind of trends, despite the fact I'm still here going rah, licensing's great, our growth has slowed a little bit over the last couple of years. And the main growth tends to be coming from smaller to medium-sized partners. which actually from a licensor perspective are probably kind of easier to manage, but it's not always necessarily the best thing for the brand, partly really because partners I think are looking to invest less with a reduced return on investment period. It used to be in the kind of good old days, people would be probably prepared to lose money in year 1, break even year 2, start making money in year 3. I think that's a model most publishers are going to recognise. These days, it's kind of 3 to 6 months, and if they're not making money, they want to cut. Which then means people don't want to invest as much, so you can get into a little bit of a vicious kind of sort of cycle. So people really need to be smart with their investments at the start. So that's a kind of an ongoing tension we have with some of our new partners. But that's part of the reason why bookazines remain buoyant, because they can literally just chuck them out there. It's a one shot. If it works, brilliant. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world because it's just a single bookazine. And what we've seen though, as I've sort of said, some bigger interest in syndication. Partners are looking to, it's actually amazing. Marie Claire obviously shut with great fanfare in the UK, I think it was announced a couple of weeks ago, but very few big print brands have actually closed in the UK, in fact, all across Europe. And what we've noticed recently, a lot of partners are looking to bolster their existing brands. They're looking to bring content in from other established media brands. I think that's part of the reason syndication has been very successful. Big emphasis, as you'd expect, on digital. The biggest issue we have with partners is about them developing the scale in their market. Sometimes people just kind of think, we're going to do a website, it's all going to be fine. It's not. You need scale. Scale costs. You need to build that scale to get on to get on an advertiser's kind of radar. And kind of going to an advertiser, we're saying I've got 10,000 uniques. Particularly say if you're in the car space, you need 500,000 uniques to get on the radar for global automotive manufacturer. So we've got issues in terms of helping our partners build their business there. And also what we're doing, which I'm going to go and talk about now, is actively developing new revenue streams as well. So there's just 3 I want to focus on. It's not rocket science. You're probably familiar with all of these, but it's where we're putting a bit of focus at the moment. You've probably all been to lots of events like this where everyone bangs on about video first and have been doing for 5 years. I think it's now become a reality. A lot of publishers now have a really good, decent inventory of video content, but it is quite expensive to produce, even though costs have come down. It's still quite expensive to produce. We're seeing quite a lot of interest and success in syndicating video content, whether it's to traditional publishers, whether it's to digital-only businesses, or come to take me away, or on portals such as MSN. They're basically making a lot of money for publishers at the moment, basically kind of curating their content and putting it across their various different lifestyle channels and their portal. So whilst nobody actually really thinks about MSN as a portal to go to, if you actually go on it, there's absolutely shed loads of UK media brands with video content on there, all making quite a decent sum of money. Can be development costs for the feeds. It's not necessarily straightforward, but it is a significant revenue opportunity if you can get it right. And one area that we're really quite interested in at the moment, and we're not alone, Dennis particularly do a very good job, is endorsement licensing. If you actually think about it, as publishers, we've really let a lot of kind of digital consumer websites eat our lunch, in the sense that who cares what Eddie from Edinburgh thinks about your product? What's his credibility? A lot of publishers and media businesses have spent years building up authority, trust, engagement in their brands, and that's been kind of taken away by a lot of consumer review websites. And a lot of publishers are now kind of beginning to fight back. The rise of earned media has given traditional publishers a really good opportunity to utilise the strength of their brands. In Immediate's case, Olive, BBC Good Food and Garner's World, and Top Gear, we've instigated quite big accreditation programmes, and it's already quite quickly a sort of major 6-figure business for us. Dennis a little bit further ahead, and they're doing close to 7-figure figures of revenue across this area, across their tech and automotive sort of space, and it's kind of like zero development cost. Effectively, you're just doing awards programs. The winners can use those awards across social media, earned media, TV. You charge them. It's a really, really simple business model, very effective. As you can sort of see here, there's a whole raft of blue chip brands which you're buying into, from Volvo, Mercedes, Hyundai, which is obviously Top Gear, to all the big supermarkets, Aldi, Morrison's, Iceland, M&S, for example. And it's very much pushing through an open door. People aren't kind of questioning, should they do it? It's more kind of like, shall I do it and how many shall I do? So it really sort of seems it's kind of an interesting part of the business. And another area which has come back kind of full circle. Everyone was doing this 10 or 15 years ago, then everyone stopped doing it because everyone got obsessed with digital. Now, in some aspects, digital isn't quite the panacea some publishers kind of thought it was going to be. So brand licensing has very much come back into focus. And, again, it's all really about exploiting the power and heritage of your brand. BBC Good Food is an obvious example. We're looking at a number of things at the moment. It needs to be relevant to the sector. So, BBC Good Food, the obvious areas for us is like gifting and cookware. There needs to be an authenticity to what you're doing. There's no point in going in a completely irrelevant kind of area because everyone's going to laugh at that. And it can be a really, really huge business. Better Homes and Gardens, which is published in the US by Meredith, they have an absolutely astronomical licensing program, and that is right, that is 23 billion in retail sales through Walmart, through Better Homes and Gardens products. I mean, obviously, they only take a small percentage of that, but, do the math, as the Americans would say. It's the second biggest to Disney globally from a licensing perspective. So if you get it right, it's quite a lucrative, not on that level, where the UK, not the US. It's lucrative, but it's a really long lead time. You're looking at a year of development, probably another year after that before you see any revenues. So you're looking at 2-3 years, but if you get it right, it can be a really lucrative ongoing revenue stream. So to kind of wrap up, I kind of think, we look at licensing in a world of opportunity, saying that you need to think global. Does your brand have global appeal? If you think it does, despite the fact you're thinking global, you kind of need to act local. I think HSB first thought of that kind of campaign, but I think it's kind of right. To do that, you need to find the right partner. As we sort of said, your partner really does need to share the same vision, value and goals that you do. You need to treat them as part of your business. Don't just do the deal with them and then sort of say, bye, I'm just going to talk to them once a year. Treat them like you would have valued kind of advertising or partnership partner as well. And also kind of importantly, you really do, and you just have to learn this stuff, to be honest. It is very different doing business in very different parts of the world, and most cliches are true. I've kind of found in kind of sort of extensive traveling around, you do need to allow for cultural differences. Don't impose your way of working on your partners in their markets. The reason you're working with a partner is to access their local expertise, and if you kind of do that, then you're halfway to developing a successful licensing business. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.